Awake. My name is Hsiao, and I'll talk a little bit about the private cloud implementation of CPaaS this morning. But I will first talk a little bit about my background because I think you will see it intertwine and sort of how it got to CPaaS today. Let me take you back to 2000. I started a company called InfoMatch, which was the first company that enabled the SMS traffic between the mobile operators to exchange to each other. So at the time, AT&T was the largest mobile operator in the US, and it had less than 10% market share. So what that means is 9 out of 10 messages going out of network wasn't going to get delivered. So we saw that as an opportunity, and we created this interoperability platform. And for a couple years, we got as much as 80% market share in the US, and we connected with more than 700 mobile operators worldwide. So that experience got me heavily into the messaging space, and I would say at about the mid-2000s, I think it's maybe 2006, 2007, telecom had, I would call at the time, a little bit of innovation. And that was Grand Central. So Grand Central was effectively a call forwarding service. And when I started working in the industry in 1991, it was before the first Motorola brick phone came out. And what I would do when I get home is, the first thing I get home, pulling up the car in front of the house, the first thing I would do is I would call forward my car phone number to my house phone. Then I wouldn't miss any calls if anybody called my car phone number. So Grand Central was effectively a call forwarding service, and it was very, very popular in the dating space. A lot of women, when they first got on these online dating sites, they weren't necessarily comfortable giving out their personal number. So what they would do is they would go get, effectively nowadays a burner number or a temporary number, and they would get that from Grand Central. And Grand Central, Craig Walker and Vinny ran it for a couple years. And what they realized was it was working fine, but it had a big hole. And the hole was SMS. Because imagine all these ladies, they got their Grand Central number, got their call forwarded to their cell phone. But the moment they started communicating with anyone, they wanted to text. And that call forwarding concept on Grand Central couldn't work on the SMS, because the moment they text somebody, the guy got their real phone number. So that kind of defeats the purpose. So then they thought, Google was smart enough and saw the opportunity. So they acquired Grand Central and effectively included the SMS feature and made it Google Voice. So that's how Google Voice came about. It was really an innovation in the telecom space, in the sense that before that, telecom was always a device-first marketplace. The devices had to talk to each other, therefore they had to have a phone number. And Google Voice made it so that you can now have a phone number first marketplace, where once the communication hits the phone number, it could be routed to any IP address or any other devices. So it was really a paradigm shift. So I want to quickly talk about that. So once Google Voice came out, and that was when they figured out how to enable the fixed line number, the CLAC numbers, and gave it an SMS capability. And some of you in the audience may know, it comes off a registry now. It's always been run by net number. So now there's an SMS registry that effectively looks into the fixed line numbers and figured out how that fixed line number could be routed. Because in the old days, if it was a non-mobile number, it didn't have the capability of SMS. So now, what happened with Google Voice when it came out is when Jeff Lawson at Twilio came up with the idea. And when he built Twilio, it was first a voice-first capability. All he was thinking about was how to do programmable voice, how to do programmable PBX over the cloud. And he was very surprised once he launched the service. The only thing that people were using was the SMS. So in the first couple of years, SMS was well over 90% of Twilio's revenues. And then he became pretty serious about SMS. I remember when he first started the company, he called me up and he wanted to figure out how SMS worked because he really didn't have any of the background in SMS, and he wanted to figure out how SMS and MMS was going to work in that space. So this is effectively, if you think about Grand Central, Google Voice, and then Jeff Lawson at Twilio's insight was, well, Google Voice designed this telephone number first ecosystem, but customers of Google Voice could only use it one way, and that is the way Google Voice designed it for you. You couldn't use it any other way. So he thought, well, what if I inserted the programmability in the middle for the developers? Then everyone could use, based on what they wanted to do, leveraging the Google Voice-like infrastructure. So that's effectively how Twilio came about, and it's amazing. I've watched the company, grown in the last 10 years. Now they're $1 billion in revenue this year. So that is totally amazing. Let me see what else. So I'm now, I've done 3 companies. My first company, InfoMatch, later became Mobile 365, was sold to Sybase in 2006. By the way, I'll give a quick quiz here. We won the second largest technology MMA that year. Anybody know what was number 1? The largest MMA in 2006 in technology. If you don't use it every day, I'm sure your kids use it every day. Any guesses? No? A younger audience would have guessed. You guys are showing your age here. It was YouTube. YouTube was bought in 2006, right about the same time Mobile 365 was acquired. They were bought, of course, almost 4 times larger, but they were number 1. So now, my third company was Hook Mobile. We started out as an MMS API company. We picked the right API space, except we picked the wrong MMS space. But anyway, I'll tell you that story if you have time. But we pivoted, of course. Then we merged with a company called Kaleyra about a year ago. And now, Kaleyra, we do about 25 billion SMS transactions this year. And then we'll have 2 billion calls this year as well. And we have telephone numbers over 50 countries. And coincidentally, we are now, I believe, the largest player in private cloud CPaaS implementations, and which I'll talk a little bit more. All right, so everybody, talks about UCaaS and CPaaS, and this is maybe let's review the use cases, and I can tell you kind of how I look at this space. So it's, there's lots of use cases, obviously Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, with the, anonymous number being the bridge. That was a very large use case. By the way, the first large use case on Twilio was an application called GroupMe. And that was, the concept was very simple. The simple insight was you can hit reply all when you receive an email, but you could not do a reply all when you receive a text message. So they use a telephone number to be the group number. So every time you reply to the group number, it would automatically forward that message to everybody in the group. So that was a very, very interesting concept. They did a hackathon, and within 12 months, they sold the company to Skype for $75 million. So any of you in the audience that likes hackathons, you could take that example and feel good about what you're doing over the weekend. So there's obviously lots of use cases. There's 2-factor authentication, right? People really don't talk about, but lots of the traffic on CPaaS is actually just 2-factor authentication. Very simple use cases. Notifications, receipts for digital transactions. I will give a couple examples I thought was pretty interesting. So first example is, when you go to some cities and you want to park off the street, nobody carries quarters anymore. and the meters don't want to take quarters anymore, right? So the easiest use case now is you either do a barcode scan, or you go to their website on your mobile phone in all cases, because that's what you carry in your pocket. You go to mobile web, because most likely you haven't downloaded the city parking app yet, right? So most likely you will actually go to mobile web. So the first thing that happens is they want to do a two-factor authentication to tie your transaction to your mobile number. And then once you go through the transaction and enter your credit card, whatnot, then they send you a receipt. So the first SMS was a two-factor authentication. The second SMS was a receipt of your start time, stop time, location, license plate, number. Then you will receive a third text message, 15 minutes reminder before the meter expires. And then you will at least receive one more when the meter does expire. So right now, if you think about it, CPaaS use cases enabling these type of software applications, or IoT if you want to think of it. If you think of it, the parking meter, even though the parking meter itself is not online, right? So it's not necessarily an IoT device, but it is a device. So effectively, the CPaaS capability is enabling these type of applications to be able to communicate to the consumer customers. Right now, I would say most of these transactions or these notifications are one way, just like the parking meter example. It's a parking meter sending you a message, right? That's mostly one way. In the future, I think it will be much more interactive. You'll be able to actually talk back to the parking meter and say, hey, I want to extend for another 15 minutes or whatever it is, just over natural language. But in any case, so that's one good example I think I could talk about. The other one I think I would always talk about is a car dealership example. So right now you call the car dealership, but by the way, I was telling the story in Europe and somebody says, oh, that's exactly how it works in Europe too. So you call the number, you call the car dealership number, IVR picks it up. Almost universally, it says press 1 for sales, press 2 for service. I don't know who designed it in the beginning, but every dealership works the same way. So you press 2 for service. This is where it breaks down, in the sense that now you're looking for a human being to come online and said, hey, this person doesn't know who you are, right? And all the person does is to ask you when you want to bring the car in, and checks the calendar. So obviously that a bot could do that much better, and then much more multi-threaded and 24/7, right? So now if you say press 2, it would be great if it just works like a Alexa experience at home. I say, hey, by the way, if you call it from your mobile phone, it should already know who you are, because most likely you're in the system. They have your mobile number because they have to call you when the car's ready or whatever the case might be, right? So it should already be like, hey, Mr. Quell, I know you have, which car you like to bring in. Is it a Toyota, Lexus, whatever? You confirm it, and they say, hey, when would you, just over natural language. And you should be able to say, hey, I want to bring the car in next Tuesday afternoon. And they should automatically go find a slot. And of course, now I'm on my phone talking. I can't write anything down. So that then the system triggers an SMS message with the notification with all the information I need. And by the way, if I need to change it, I don't need to call back again. I could actually just text back and say, I want to change appointment or whatever the case might be. Cancellations, even when you check in. When you get there, you don't necessarily have to actually talk to a receptionist. You can actually check in by SMS as well. So you can think of it as, the CPaaS platform is going to enable all of these capabilities that you can think of. And the way I differentiate UCaaS and CPaaS, and more from the market perspective, not from the technology perspective, is UCaaS is unified communications with the interface for a human being, right? I want my communications to be unified for me. So there's some kind of UI for a human being. And the software and the capabilities to enable that is generally called the UCaaS. Now, CPaaS, on the other hand, is the application being used by an application a software or an IoT where there's not a human being interface, and that the cloud capabilities trigger automatically by embedded into some kind of application or software. Now, regardless, it's always communicating on the other side to a human being. So whatever the consumer customers will be, and that's how they would use it. And normally, it's omni-channel. Omni-channel in the sense that not doing all channels, but the channel of choice of the consumer. So if I want to receive my communications, just like, maybe the car dealership example, right? If I want to receive my communication over WhatsApp, I should be able to choose that. And if I want to receive my communication over voice, I should be able to choose that, right? So omni-channel of the choice from the customer perspective. And our CEO is famous for saying, if people still use pigeons as messenger service, like we will actually operate a fleet of pigeons. Like we don't really care. It's whatever the end customer wants to use, we'll provide that capability over the cloud. So I think that's kind of how I look at the market difference. And this is also what you could, some of the UCaaS company will get into the CPaaS company naturally, because the growth of human beings on Earth is going to be limited. In fact, might be declining, except the emerging markets. But the number of software and applications is going to grow exponentially forever, right? So from that perspective, yeah, of course, we want to be in the CPaaS space instead of the UCaaS space. All right, very well. So let me kind of jump right into the private cloud implementation. And if you think about that, obviously, the Twilio started out 100% public cloud, 100% over AWS for that matter. And any vertical or any company, any environment that needs some sort of security or compliance included, they will have to figure that out on top of this public cloud implementation. And that is not very attractive, right? So if I'm the bank, it's very difficult to imagine I'm going to tell my developers to go find something, bring it back, and we'll figure out the security and compliance later. That is not how the banks operate, and that is not very efficient. So what we would do in that case with our customers is it's much more, and by the way, it's a very different sales and marketing model, right? It's not developer-led approach. It's top-down approach. And we start with their security and compliance parameters. So there's an engagement right out front about how they would migrate their communications boxes that's hosted within their environment to take some capabilities and the omni-channel capabilities into the cloud, right? Every bank right now has a team that handles digital transformation, and they're looking at all of their boxes and moving them to the cloud somehow. And communications to the consumers is one of those. The way a bank would have done it will be, hey, if they need an IVR, they build an IVR box, they maintain it every year, they upgrade it when it needs to. They need SMS, people use SMS, they build an SMS box. And then people need WhatsApp for business, they build a box to handle that. The people want app push notification, email, they keep building these capabilities. And they're sort of a standalone boxes. And then some, so what we will offer to these customers, banking particularly, will be to take all of that capability and make it a single implementation so that they don't have to make individual technology bets for each service they want to provide. And effectively, it's a paradigm shift from an operational perspective as much as technology perspective, right? So you can think about cases where banking is the most obvious because a lot of the consumer data is highly sensitive, and there's lots of transactions, payment transactions, and things of that nature that they wouldn't want anyone outside of the environment to access. So what we would do is we determine their security environment, we determine their compliance environment, and then we will effectively fit the CPaaS capabilities within those environments. And that's how we would do it. So it's sort of a halfway between a fully hosted solutions versus a public cloud solution, if that makes any sense. So if you can look at the differences with the public cloud, with the private cloud in this example, none of our banking customers share any of the the boxes effectively. They don't share. We have effectively dedicated virtual space for each of them, and they handle their cluster of customers separately, and obviously this is to protect the confidentialities and the data security for any of the sensitive data. And you can see how this approach will be able to extend into other verticals like healthcare, government, and some others. So what we will look at is, if you look at how the CPaaS market is going to grow, and right now very, very small, less than 1%, I presume, is coming through a private cloud implementation. And we believe that over time, many of these verticals that otherwise want to use cloud communications will most likely go with a private cloud implementation versus a public cloud implementation. And this is where Kaleyra differentiates, because either, I know Tony's in the audience, either Neximo or Twilio have actually have put much focus on private cloud implementation. So very quickly, I'll talk, obviously just end with some of the benefits. Obviously, if you think about it, the benefit that we pitch is lower cost of total ownership, so they don't have to continue to build and maintain these disparate boxes. And it's a single implementation, it's a single support interface. And that gives them a migration path to any future upgrades that will be included via the cloud. They don't have to make any technology bets, or they don't have to make any bets of what they believe their consumers will most likely to use. They don't have to make those investments, right? Because if they think they want to add WhatsApp for Business, we would just bring that capability. But in this case, if they launch WhatsApp for Business and people don't use it, no harm, right? No harm for that, for trying. But if otherwise, they will have to make that investment and then build it and operate it and so on. They obviously much more stringent control of their data and their process, and then we provide a very stringent SLA with them. So that's also very different. If any of you are Twilio customers, there's very, very little, if any, SLA involved. And then for the providers like Kaleyra, what's our benefit? Well, the number one benefit is you sign a longer term contract. It's generally a multi-year contract, because the customer wouldn't necessarily want to go through this exercise every year. And the other benefit we get is we get 100% of their transactions. Many of these larger digital giants, when they go through a public cloud implementation, they multi-source, because there's no reason not to. With a private cloud implementation, we get 100% of their transactions, and we effectively become their diversity platform. Through these implementations, we gain further insights of their business, and then we could obviously take that to other customers as well. It is a top-down engagement and relationships. So you actually do pick up the phone and talk to someone and things of that nature, versus more of a developer relationship. It's much more solid. And then there's much less pricing fluctuations. In fact, we could predict our revenue quite well. And these customers, even though the gross margin will be much lower, because they're obviously large banks and larger volume of transactions, but you also get highly stable customers. So there's obviously a lot of benefits for our customers, and there's a lot of benefits to Kaleyra or a company like us who would provide these type of solutions over private cloud. With that, I think we'll go through the panel, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.